Hello and welcome to Climate Emergency Centre Wednesday webinar, which this week is discussion, which is a fantastic format, so we can all chat a bit more. And basically, Francis Seeley from an amazing group that we met the other year, doing from Enfield Climate Action Forum. They're kind of alliance of about 120 different community groups, environment groups from all across Borough of Enfield, and been doing great work getting the community together and consulting them. And they've been doing kind of community assemblies, climate hub, community hubs, and they're going to tell us a bit more climate cafes and things. So sounds like you've been doing great work, Francis. It was lovely to meet you the other year. Tell us a bit more. Over.
Okay, yeah, I'm from Enfield Climate Action Forum, and as you said, Phoenix, it's a network of around 145 groups now, and that's a network. It's not paid membership. It's a network of people who get together, work together, set working groups up on things like air pollution, waste, land use, business, and so on. And then try to develop ideas and action plans going forward. And when you asked me to do this on Sunday, I said that I wouldn't have too much time to prepare, so I'm going to come up with some ideas and tell you what we've been doing to see if that can generate a discussion and you can help us to do it even better. I sort of entitled it when Phoenix said, "Will you do this?" or Linda said, "Will you do this?" Climate change and democracy. Because I think there's a real challenge, a real problem about democratic accountability in our system, and that citizens don't know how to influence it if they can influence it. And I think we sort of face, people have tried to influence it. Local authorities, for example, 2 years ago, went into a tidal wave of declaring climate emergencies. And they did it almost as a fashion, virtue signaling. Many of them didn't even know what they were going to do. And according to the Local Government Association, some of them did nothing. They just declared it, and that was it. And others did good things, and others did things that really didn't work. Because again, the LGA, I think, said that many local authorities, if not most, will not reach the targets they set out in their climate emergency plans. And trying to influence that as citizens is very difficult. And I think we've got three problems at the moment, or three crises around climate change. One is climate change itself. And the second one is the fact that we can influence as well as we would like, and therefore there is a lot of anxiety amongst people because of the future, and how do we handle that? And the third one is a democratic deficit. We can't really work through our democratic system as it is at the moment because it doesn't seem to work. Climate emergency clearly is definitely there. We know that we have to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And we know from some of the debates going on in science at the moment that some people like James Hansen, who was a famous scientist who really introduced the idea of climate change to the American Congress in 1988. He thinks we reached a threshold, a tipping point, and things are going to be much quicker than we originally thought, and that we could be 2 degrees at 2050 over what we should be, and 5 to 6 degrees by the end of the century, which would be catastrophic. People like Michael Mann, who is a colleague of his, also believes, we've got a crisis, but he thinks there's still things we can do about it. So scientists are pretty well 100% convinced that climate change has happened. It's caused by humans, but there's disagreement about how fast it's going and what we should do to try and deal with it.
He was kind of the original, wasn't he, James Hansen? He blew the whistle originally and kind of said this is, really urgent.
Yeah, he did in 1988. But climate change has been known since the 19th century, when people started measuring carbon dioxide. And also, it began to be known in companies in this country since 1954. But they only began to use computer models on it really in the 80s. And in 88, that's when Hansen went to Congress in America and really blew the lid on it. And for 10 years, it looked as if we were going to do something, and then the multinational companies, fought back. And also, they're saying, obviously, we have to do something to stop mitigation. We also have to adapt because there's enough carbon dioxide in the air at the moment. You see, I'm letting people in as I do it. There's enough carbon dioxide in the air at the moment to, even if we were to stop fossil fuel production tomorrow, we would still be having extreme weather and increase in temperatures by the end of the century. So we have to adapt. And the Climate Change Committee, which advises the government, says the UK as well, behind on doing that. So we've got a real problem, and I think because we've got that problem, a lot of people are getting really, really despondent about it, and particularly young people. YouGov did a survey a while ago, which showed that 65% are worried about climate change and 25% are very, very worried. But it's not just young people, it's everyone, and old people as well, people like me. That when a survey was done about extreme weather, 49% of young people were concerned about it, but 48% of all people, and that included older people. And when you think about it, it's older people who are going to suffer from things like heat excess. We know in 2003 in Paris, not in Paris, sorry, in the whole of Europe, 70,000 people died because of extreme temperatures, 15,000 in France, and Paris bore the brunt of it. And the people who died were generally older people living alone, and particularly women. So older people are getting really concerned about it. And recently you may have seen that a group of older women in Switzerland went to the European Court of Human Rights and actually got a ruling that Switzerland's climate policy was actually violating their own human rights to survive and have family rights. So they are also concerned about it. And when you have that concern, you do get anxiety. And I think that's the second problem. People are really anxious. They feel helpless. They don't know what to do. I think another YouGov poll showed that only 9% of people aged 16 to 24 thought they could influence anything around climate change. There's a real worry about that. And how do they make a change? Well, our democracy is supposed to be how they make change. It's supposed to be empowered people to make change. We're supposed to be able to elect people to make that change. And people should be able to influence the decision makers over the decisions they make. But it's not working. Again, another poll showed that 67% in this country believe democracy is not working, and only 9% trust our politicians. 12% 2 years ago, 21% maybe something like 8 years ago, but it's now 9%. In America, it's 6%. So there is a real crisis of democracy at a time of crisis in climate change when people are really, really worried. The parliamentary system doesn't really work because I don't know if any of you read Isabel Hartman's book, Why We Get the Wrong Politicians. It lists the whole reasons why Parliament doesn't work. One of them is, many of MPs are selected, safe seats by parties, and they automatically get elected because the seats are safe. And they're selected by such a small number of people because party membership is going down and down. And it's easy to infiltrate those parties. And people who are activists in political parties, very often not representative of the general population. They've been moved to have open primaries and things like that. But that's not really happened except in a couple of places. And when MPs get into the House of Commons, they get very frustrated because they find they can't do what they thought they could do. The House of Commons now no longer really legislates or scrutinises, or the MPs don't. It comes down from government and whips enforce what MPs should do. And if they don't do it, they often lose the whip, or they get told that they won't get promotion. So they're fairly well kept in line. So MPs tend to be glorified social workers, or they have ambitions to get into cabinet. That's what they're there for. The legislation where they should independently think doesn't happen. So when we contact our MP and we think we're influencing them, it's hard to do that, because although they may say, yes, I sort of agree with you, they're still vote the way their whip says. So we have a real problem in democracy. And there are three ways of counteracting that. One is through the courts, like I mentioned, the Swiss women who went to the European Court of Human Rights, and climate activists have been using the courts to try and prevent convictions that they've had, or to take government or companies to court, but it costs money and it's difficult to do. And the government is trying to shut that down as much as they can. The other way is through demonstrations, which I think is really important because they can help to change attitudes in the long term. But very often demonstrations can happen and people still are ignored. I think there has to be a much more long-term way of doing that. And I think one of those ways, and your lady there mentioned people's assemblies, I think one way of doing that is through what is called deliberative democracy. Deliberative democracy is a way where people come together and try to come to an agreement through consensus. They don't shout at each other. There's no adversarial way of doing things as there is in the House of Commons. And then looking at how they could turn some of those discussions into action. I mean, there are a number of ways in which deliberative democracy takes place. I don't know if anyone saw the film Best of Enemies, where there was in Durham in North Carolina a problem where there were a Black activist and a Black community leader and white community with a lot of people in the Ku Klux Klan, and the Black school burnt down, not deliberately, it was an accident, and they had to shift the kids into the white school, and that caused uproar amongst the white Ku Klux Klan. And to try and overcome and find what they could do, they set up what was called a charrette, which is like a citizens' assembly, but it's centered around that focus. Do we actually allow the schools to integrate? And it lasted for 3 or 4 or 5 days, and there was a lot of discussion. And it ended up with the leader of the Ku Klux Klan getting up and saying, you know, I've been proud of being a member of this. I believed in what I was doing, but I don't any longer. Tore up his Ku Klux Klan card and voted for integration. Got to know the Black leader, the activist leader, and worked with her for the rest of his life on racial integration. Now, that was a real outcome of a deliberative process that happened, and citizens' assemblies are another way of doing that. The trouble with citizens' assemblies, I think there are 2 problems with that. One is they're incredibly expensive. They run over about 4 or 5 days, and they cost about £100,000, maybe more, to establish, to get everyone in, to pay their expenses, to pay for consultants and speakers and so on. And often they are so general that it's hard to take action points out of them. But there are models like in Gdansk where they've actually made them cheaper to run, made them more focused. So, for example, they ran them on particular issues like flood alleviation, and that's been quite successful. And their citizen juries as well, which are smaller types of citizens. What we've tried to do is set up what we call community hubs. Community hubs are really, I think, a lot more more ephemeral in the sense that they don't happen over a long period of time. They happen over a day or a few hours. And we came up with the idea of doing that about 2 or 3 years ago. And what we tried to do was to do a hub in the east of Enfield, where in fact the most deprived members of our community live. This is a part of the report we did, and it says the aim of the project was to try and reach those individuals and groups whose voices are rarely heard, and in the most disadvantaged parts of our borough, and to understand how climate change impacts on public health through these community hubs. And what we did is we developed what we called a multi-dimensional approach. We did a lot of work beforehand. We didn't just go in to the hub itself. We contacted about 10 different organizations, sent out 15,000 leaflets. We've produced about 24 video stories. We've produced 14 knowledge-based webinars, some reached up to 3,000 people. We organised 2 focus groups, and we conducted a survey in 7 languages, and we got 350 responses. And that helped us form the sort of programme of the community hub. But there were 2 community hubs. We decided to do 2 in different parts of the east of the borough, and also a mini one at a theatre called Chicken Shed with young people, which was a small one of 2 or 3 hours. But the bigger ones, we used a survey to look at the topics we should be tackling. So we had things like theatre to start it off, and then we would deal with subjects like food for a healthy planet, or how you repair and you recycle, about urban green space, about air pollution and so on, and heat and code, how you involve young people. And we get a speaker to speak for 5 to 10 minutes. We didn't want them to speak for very long, and then get people to engage. And people engaged very effectively for that. And we learned a lot from doing that. It was a pilot to see if it would work. And what we found is that people really wanted to talk. And we found by all the sort of multi-dimensional pre-work that we'd done, we did get voices in who didn't normally come to those sort of events. And so we had new perspectives, and that really, really worked very well. So we then had to think, right, these hubs are great, but we can't just do the hubs. We have to think how we follow up and how we turn it into action. And that was something that we then really began to think about. So one of the issues that came up in that hub was these green spaces, and in the east of the borough in Enfield, there's a lack of green spaces, a lack of trees and streets, a lack of parks. So we set up another hub, which is a different type of hub. It was more of a campaigning hub to try and convince those in power to see how we could improve green spaces in the east of the borough. So we got health people involved, we got CPR England involved in that, London rather involved in that hub, and we went through how it could be done, and we got people's views on that, which was really, really good. We then linked up with a group called Local Motion, which has 6 pilot projects in the UK, and it works on developing social justice, and I'm involved in that as well. And they are backed by 6 major funders, and in the 6 pilot areas, Local Motion is getting something like $250,000 coming in each year for 8 years. And we thought they thought they would come in with us, and we would work together on some issues. So we did, one of the things we did, which I said we'd be happy to work with them with, was we thought we would do a community hub in Palmer's Green. And this one was going to be very different. We wanted to get people to really tell us about how they felt about particular issues. So we did a survey where we got 700 responses, which was quite amazing, really. And from those responses, if I've got the thing up, I don't know if I do, I don't, it doesn't matter. From the survey, we found that people, told us what they thought were the most important issues. One was the high street and the decline of it. The next one was crime. Then there was food scarcity. There was the lack of, there was keeping up green spaces and improving green spaces. And because we did it with Local Motion, it wasn't just on climate change. So climate change formed a large part of it. And we did it in partnership with the local mosque. We felt doing it in partnership with an organisation was very important because they could bring in a new audience, and they were really good, and they had great facilities, and they helped a great deal, and they took an active part in it. And it sort of blew our minds away. 120 people came in throughout the day. We didn't expect that number, and we divided into working groups, and we have facilitators for each of those working groups, and we did some training for those facilitators before the event. And so we then had a note taker, and we had a videographer. So we got all the record of what people said. And then we thought, we now have to look at how we can turn what people are saying into action plans, because we don't want community hubs to happen and then to be put on the shelf. We want to see how we can take it forward. So we're taking it forward in several ways. One is that the one we did on green spaces in Eastern Enfield, we also followed that one in Edmonton, in Eastern Enfield, on race and equality, where we looked at the inequality that they face in that area over housing and unemployment. And we're now bringing those two together to do another hub in a couple of weeks' time, which looks at how they can influence on these issues, the local plan that's being developed, so that we can put recommendations into the inspector who judges whether a council's local plan, which we think is inadequate, should go through as it is, or it should be amended. So there will be some action around that. But what we also did from the Farmers Green Hub is we tried to set up a, let me see if I've got it here. This is it. No, it's this one. What we tried to do is we tried to look at some of the issues that came up in the hub, and also some of the other issues we were developing. So we looked at things like heat excess that came up, food security, energy co-ops. We looked at the progress we were making on each of those, the partners that we would need to take it forward, and what the output is. And we did this on all these issues, and we did it on other issues as well, like adaptation, air pollution, Banbury Park, which was the Green Park in Edmonton. We did it on how we work with businesses, how we work with students and the sustainable development goals, which we began to do, how land use is used in the local area. And we tried to look at how we can develop an interfaith group, because that came out of the thing we did in the mosque, how we can develop our waste group and encourage recycling, and how we deal with waste, and MP Watch, how we work with MPs, and how we sort of try to influence them where we know that is difficult. So what we're doing now is a follow-up, and on June the 25th, we're working with a place called Ruth Wilson House, which is a place where over 50s can get together. And we're going to look at climate change in older people. We're going to follow up according to that action plan, where we look at how excess heat affects people. And we've got people coming, we've got a consultant coming, geriatrician, we've got someone from the Energy Savings Trust, and they will all give an introduction for about 5 to 10 minutes. And we'll try to get people into groups then to talk about what their fears are about heat excess in the future, which we know will kill people if we don't do something about it, and what they think should be done. Now, from that, we hope to take that forward and see if we can develop a strategy around it. So what we also have set up is what's called we call a collaborative network, and we set this up after our first two hubs we did. And that was a network of people in the voluntary sector who were interested in a particular topic we were discussing, people from the health authorities, people from the local authorities, officers, basically. Councillors never seem to want to be involved, and they're not as useful as officers usually. So we set this up, and we meet every 6 weeks, and we've got a meeting on May the 17th. And one of the things I hope we'll look at is how we take ideas that come from these hubs forward in the strategy. So we've got heat excess on that agenda, for example, so that we can look at strategies like Paris has developed. When Paris suffered in 2003, it resulted in them producing the most comprehensive strategy to deal with heat excess. They now have, no one is more than 7 minutes walk away from a cooling spot. They have fountains all over the place. They have a database of people who are vulnerable. We don't. In Enfield, we don't have a database of vulnerable people, and I'm sure that's true in most local authorities. In Paris, they did. They found a database of those people who were living alone. They not only found it, but they used to visit them and talk to them about what would happen. And they sent up hubs. And I think they've learned from the experience in America that refuge or hubs that they've set up there are not enough. because people don't want to go and spend all day not knowing anyone, lonely and so on. So they've tried to create them in advance of things happening, so people could go there, they can get to know it, they can have some sort of conviviality. So when a crisis comes, then they would go to a place that they know is friendly. And they've arranged for people to pick up people, because 2003 there were refugees, but people had to walk 45 minutes to get there. In 45 degrees, which is what they had, or almost 45 degrees, people were baked alive, so they stayed at home and baked in their homes. That's how many died. So Paris has developed that sort of strategy. So what I'm hoping is, from the collaborative network, we can also have a strategic approach like that. So that's basically, what we're trying to do. We're trying to set up community hubs so people's voices can be heard. We're trying to get people together so that they come up with the ideas that we can take forward. We're trying to, as much as we can, turn some of those ideas into action plans. And we're trying to set up a collaborative network with the statutory authorities and with the voluntary sector. And I hope we may at times include businesses as well, to develop a strategy that will take things forward. So I hope that works, but it's a sort of slow process, but it's happening. I mean, the hubs have happened quite fast, and I think that they've taken off locally, and other organisations are doing them now, like the Enfield Racial Equality Council, like the Citizens Advice Bureau. Several of them are following the model that we've established, and they're getting people to work together. So I think it's had a sort of caterpillar effect and a cascading effect, and I think that's been really good. So that's the method we've used, and the hubs themselves aren't like the ones that Phoenix has, which they're in buildings, where Phoenix looks for buildings that you can take over and people can go to. They're in different places. We move them around depending what partners we work with, where the location is we want to be. If we're talking about the east of Enfield, it's no good having a hub in the west of Enfield, so we have to go. So we work for partners to do it. So that mobility, I think, is really important, and I think it works very well for us. So we've been on this sort of journey now for about 2.5 years, and we're still learning. And we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to find the difficulties of turning ideas into action, but we're trying to create a process where we can do that. So hubs in their own right don't just meet, talk, and then disappear. We want there to be a follow through. So that's what we do. Anyhow, that's it for now.
Oh, absolutely amazing. Francis, you're doing incredible work there. The whole of the ECAF alliance of groups, 120 groups, really, really interesting, incredible work there. And you're working on so many levels, and getting groups involved. And like you say, your model's now, spreading out to other groups doing that. I'm a lot clearer on it now. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So folks, we're having more discussion tonight. So whatever you feel, you can either chip in, or there is a reactions button down the bottom here. Raise your hand and say something. We need more of these kind of collaborative community hub discussions. What are they called? Community assemblies or climate cafes. Over to you guys. Anyone want to give it? It doesn't have to be a question.
My video back on, please. Can you re-video? Can you? I can't get my video back.
That was me just making sure no one came and bombed us. They're back on now.
All right, thanks,
No,
Helen.
I wanted to say that. Is it Heart Mosque that you work alongside of? The Heart Mosque.
Oh, no, we work with 2 mosques, actually. One in East Enfield, when we did the first hub, it's called the Rumi Mosque, and we went and visited them, and we talked to them, and they came. And the other mosque where they provided the location, the Palmer's Green Mosque, was called the Palmer's Green Mosque, which is a big progressive one.
Yeah. There's a mosque here that's doing stuff for the streets. I thought it might be something to do with you, but you're close to me, so how would we find you? Because I'd like to stick my head in at some point.
Where are you?
And say hi.
Where
I'm
are
in Turkey Street it's
Oh,
called.
you are in Enfield. Well, I mean, right. I'll put my email in here, and if you write to me, I'll
Okay.
make sure you know about it, because we'd love to do a hub in the Turkey Street area. That's one area we haven't done it yet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think I could be a sort of use. So I'll just write to the email then. Thanks. I'll look at that. All right, thanks.
Nice one, Amoeba. Anyone else there? Or yeah, comments, feedbacks. Tim, just jump in. We're trying to do more discussion format this night. Jump in or stick your hand up. Tim.
I see we've got Aurora with us as well, who's just come on. Aurora is in ECAF, and she's one of our key members. She runs our air pollution group and does a huge amount of work on that.
We can hear for Aurora. Tim, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah,
and then
okay. Francis, if you hadn't planned that, I'm amazed, because it was such a good presentation. So when you have planned one, it must be fantastic. But that was really good. I thought you spoke really well and summarised the situation we're in, and everything else. A couple of things. You said you sent surveys out initially to get people along to the hubs, and I guess that's how you get people in. You send out. Invite them in, you survey. How do you actually get people to come in? What's your...
Oh, well, I mean, the survey helped. I mean, when we did the first survey 2.5 years ago, it was a manual survey. So we went and got people to sign it with a pen. And they left their emails, but often you can't read their writing. And so the emails are never accurate. But so that we decided that the second one will be online. And if it was online, you could capture their emails. So we developed a mailing list, which meant that we could send people newsletters, and we could tell them about the hub and when it is, and we could ask them to come. So that was really important. The survey was about finding people's opinions, but it was also to capture their emails, so we could try to get them to come to the hub as well. But of course, all the other things we did were important. I mean, I must have sent out 100 or 200 letters to individual groups and people for the Palmer's Green Hub. I sent out tweets with hashtags to over 100 different people and groups. I arranged for video stories to be told. We would do short 2 or 3 minute recordings of what people felt about climate change. Went to Chicken Shed and did some recording of young people and what they felt. And many of those had learning difficulties as well, because Chicken Shed worked with those with learning difficulties, and those who haven't, they work together. We did some webinars as well on knowledge-based webinars on it. And we visited places like the Rumi Mosque, and we worked with the Windrush Festival people in Edmonton and had us all there and put leaflets out and got people to sign the survey for that. So it was a lot of work, but it paid off. And the Palmer's Green one really paid off. We got so many people there, and we got, those voices are unheard. What we didn't get is councillors. We got one councillor at the Palmer's Green Mosque, and that's good. Councillors, and that councillor said to me, I had coffee with him, and I said, why won't other councillors come? And he said, A, they're afraid they'll upset their leader by saying the wrong thing, and B, they're frightened. They like ward forums where there are not many people there. They're all over 50. They're all the same suspects, and it's sort of in a hierarchical way organised with the councillors at the top. If you bring to a councillor to a hub where they're in a round circle, and you've got a facilitator, and they're just equally one of others there, it frightens them. So how to get councillors involved is a challenge for us.
Are they getting on board with that? Is it something?
Well, we are getting on board with some councillors, but we've had trouble with the leader because we've been critical of their land use plan and their air pollution work that Aurora's done. We've had problems about green space and so on, and they have a leadership there which, if you are in any way opposing them or critical of them, they tend to want to shut you off. However, there's some councillors who do want to work with you, and the deputy leader met me and I said, let's work together on the things we agree on and the things we disagree on. Well, okay, that's democracy. And he agreed with that, and we agreed on 4 things. But it's an uphill struggle. You know, you take 1 step forward and there's 2 steps back, and then you take another step forward. You just have to be patient.
I think Alan wants to, has got his hand up there. Do check a hand up, folks. It'd be lovely to hear from Aurora if she wants to share at some point. Alan, then Helen.
Thanks. Francis, so you were saying about the hubs moving around and being mobile, going from place to place. What are you saying to these places that are going to have a hub about what their commitment is, like a minimum commitment to being a hub? And what do you do if they want to carry on being a hub afterwards?
Well, I suppose you'd ask that question if you see the work that Felix is doing. What do they do to carry on? When, for example, when we worked with the Palmersbury Mosque, their commitment was to provide us with volunteers, to provide us with the premises, to have you know, a projector there so we could do PowerPoint if we needed, to provide refreshments, and we had a bit of a budget to help them as well to do that. And we had a session on interfaith, which we wanted them to very much be involved in. So it was just those sort of agreements. When we did that, the first hub, we did it, one of them we did in the Forest Road Health Centre. So we worked with the physiotherapists there who set it all up, and who you know, said they could do other hubs there. They didn't say they want to. They don't necessarily follow it up by doing hubs themselves, unless they've got the sort of knowledge about how to do it. But if anybody wants to, we would help them.
Thank you very much.
Helen, Simon, Tim.
Yeah, I had 2 questions. One which came to mind when you were talking about councillors not being receptive is that maybe it's not like Southampton, where we have quite a low turnout relatively, potentially, where we've you know, it's very difficult to get a Green councillor elected, but there's potential that people who participate in the hubs and become involved in that might have the capacity to, you know, be encouraged to put their own names forward, or somebody in their community, and that might be a possible way to improve your democratic voice. I don't know, because a lot of people consider it and think about it and then think, oh no, I couldn't possibly. But if the hub is there, you know, if the people are there to support them once they're elected, it might be a possibility or achievable. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem we've got, and some may disagree with this, is the party system. I mean, the party system, which has grown up in Parliament, some local authorities follow it, you know, word for word, and have whips and not allow councillors to be free and talk as they want. And the party system, I think, is shocking at a local level, the way it's run. I'm not saying you could get rid of it, but I think councillors should be totally free to give their views, not necessarily the whipped view, the official view, but what they think, so that they can engage honestly with their community. Now, if they did that, I think people would be encouraged to be councillors more, and the hubs would help that. But at the moment, people often don't want to be councillors. It's been like an MP. They're a bit like just signing, you know, signing off the policy that they've been told to sign off on, and not to criticise it. And there have been real problems in Enfield where people who have been critical have had the whip withdrawn, and there have been real problems. 7 councillors, or was it 9? I can't remember whether it's 7 or 9, really either got the whip withdrawn or resigned because of frustration or fear of bullying, because they were being bullied into being in line. It's a real problem. So I think the party system is really bad, the way it's run in local government. People are virtue signalling all the time, and politicians want to say, you know, if Labour wasn't here, it wouldn't happen this, and another council will say, if Conservatives weren't in power, this wouldn't happen. And they're both doing the same things, but they're just virtue signalling very often.
I remember that voting in Enfield was fairly tribal,
yeah,
as well. You know, there was definitely, you know, red or blue kind of going on there. So my other question was, oh my goodness, yes, when you say we, could you talk a bit about your core group? You know, is it a large number of people or a small number of really committed people? Or, I mean, how does that work? How do you organize yourself as a core group when you refer to we?
Aurora, you're on our core group. Do you want to say something about that? There, I'll put you on the spot, haven't I?
I'm sorry, it's just
Yes, I mean, we started with a core group of about 4 or 5 people, and but gradually people came in, and some people came in, and some people came out, and I'm not sure how many people there are now in the hub group, in the core group, but yes, they are quite committed, I think, and they do a lot of work. Yeah.
We have an annual meeting every year, and we try not to have an election. We ask for volunteers, and if they volunteer, the Constitution says 15 people, but we can co-opt others. So if we had 20 people that are really keen, 15 people will come on, and we will co-opt the other 5 at our first meeting. So we get people who are keen. Some of them are from groups. Some of them have specific, you know, real interests, like Aurora has on air pollution, and others have specific interests in other areas. But it's always hard, you know. We try to be a task group. That is not a group that tells other people what they should be doing, you know, but a group where if you have an idea, you're sort of responsible for carrying it through. And so we try to work on that basis.
Yeah, because in the area where I live now in Hampshire, there's a Hampshire Climate Action Network, but it's such a geographically wide area, and a lot of areas are very sparse population. And so they, you know, your ideas just sound fantastic for an urban environment. So I'm just thinking about that really, and how useful what you've said has been. So thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you, Helen. That's great stuff. Simon and then Tim.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Francis. My question is maybe a bit more towards Phoenix and sort of idea for a future Wednesday webinar. So with Climate Action Leads, we're fortunate we've got a big chunk of funding from the National Lottery, and we're a 5-year programme in our 4th year now. We've been setting up a climate emergency centre, but the big thing on my mind and on a lot of our minds at the moment is how do we do it beyond the funding that we've got in place at the moment? And I know that we're like one of the more fortunate sort of climate emergency centres in terms of funding. So the question to you, Francis, but also I think would be good to have as a either discussion or webinar at some point is around, you know, how do we fund a climate emergency centre, or how do you fund community hubs that you're doing, Francis?
Yeah, I think it is important that if you have premises, one of the problems I think you have is worry about funding for premises, and sometimes that can take away from the action that you need to do, and that's the downside. The upside is that you know, people have got a place they can go to, and there's a convivial atmosphere. So funding is a problem. What we do in the hubs we do is that some of them need funding, some don't. I mean, one we're going to do at Ruth Winston House on climate change and older people. I'll be surprised if it costs anything. You know, they're providing the premises. We got a budget if we wanted to get refreshments, which won't be much, but some of them cost nothing. Community hubs, that's the difference between some community hubs and say, you know, citizens assembly. But Local Motion was so keen on what the idea that we were doing that they put into our budget something like £32,000 for future hubs, but not for us to run. We ring-fenced it. We've got to do it with them, so we have to agree it with them. We can't go off and run off on our own. And not all of them will be on climate change because they deal with other issues. So, you know, the hub that we did recently on race and equality, it cost £1,500 that we could take out of that particular, you know, fund. So I think if you can get you know, seed money, small amounts of money, you can run hubs quite successfully. The trouble is if you start getting very professional and you want to pay people, and I mean by professional, I don't mean good, I mean paying people, then that's when they get expensive. And most of our speakers have come free. We did pay in Parliament Green the facilitators because we put them on a training session and they had to do more work, but the speakers came free. And of course, we because we had a budget there, and quite a good budget for that, we could pay for a videographer and a note taker and a report taker as well, a report maker as well.
That is a very good question. It's really, really good as well, Francis. Just to say, someone else beaming in there. It's a good question. It's been a long-term debate within our movements and our networks, how much you get funding from grants, how much you are self-funded. I mean, part of the CEC model is they're self-funded because you don't pay any rent. You sometimes, you know, you get a charitable donation from the property owners. Sometimes councils have given some funds and support. But you know, when you have space, it can generate money. You can generate money from a cafe. You can generate money from events, whatever it is, £5–10 on the door. You can also, you know, raise funds from hire of space. You know, whether that's, you know, if you've got 10 rooms and a main hall in a you know 3-story office block, then you know you can get whatever 100–200 quid a week for certain rooms for offices to hiring out to groups. There's also things like merchandise. I mean, it's a long debate and discussion how much you run on voluntary, whether you pay 1 or 2 or 3 or more people staff wages or voluntary and the rest. I mean, the classic story is really the Earth Centre in Doncaster. We started back in the early 90s, 92, after the Rio Earth Summit, and there was an ecology centre in London, and then they Rose Bridger, the lady from there, they went up to do the Doncaster Earth Centre and had a massive amount of funding for the millennium. Lots of people getting paid high wages and the rest. And just after the millennium, about 2–3 years afterwards, this great centre got created, and then the government cut all the funding after 3 years. And I suppose, you know, it's good to get funding, it's good to take grants, but also it's good to be self-sufficient. It's good to be, you know, like one of the big selling points when we've talked to councils is we're self-funded. You give us the building, or the property developer gives us the building, you give us the 100% of the business rates, we will generate enough money to, you know, do the minor repairs and keep the building going. But that's working a lot on the voluntary model. And I see now, you know, certain groups across the network, you know, I think Windsor and Maidenhead saw the other day, Swindon, they're now advertising for centre managers, and they've got some funding or whatever, and they're centre managers at 28k a year and stuff, you know. The Climate Emergency Centre network's been run on, you know, phone bills and maybe a 10 grand grant from Lush and a few other bits and pieces here and there. But we work a lot on the network we've had for years of people helping us. So all of these things need to be weighed up, really. And
I mean,
self-sufficient in the time that you've got and things. Over, I hope a few bits. Simon, Tim, over. Welcome, Mia.
Oh,
hello, Mia. Where are you? Sorry, Tim. Just
hi. Hi. Sorry. Yes. I'm Mia. I'm from. I'm in Durham.
Oh, cool.
Sorry, I'm a bit late.
A wizard is always perfectly on time, as Gandalf says to the Hobbit.
Do you want me to do my presentation again? For Mia?
There is a video recording. It will be on the YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the chat in a minute. Most welcome. There is a Durham Climate Emergency Centre group. I'm not sure if you're linked, but I'll put a link in. It's on the map as well. Welcome, Mia. Tim, did you want to make your point? And then Mia?
Yeah, if I can do, yeah. I mean, you answered a little bit. I was going to ask you, because we are in one of the local motion areas with Lincoln. I think, you know, local motion's remit was to go into areas and to run community assemblies or community hubs, as you call them. And we're a little bit frustrated at Lincoln because they don't seem to be doing it. And you know, we've got a sort of fledgling CEC with some premises that we share with other groups. So we haven't got our own premise. So yeah, from what you were saying, you know, local motion actually found you and said, we want to be part of what you're doing. Is that the way it worked, Francis?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't come up with the idea. They, you know, I talked about it. They liked it. they didn't know how to do it. So we were going to do one in Palmer's Green, and we said, come in partnership with us, which was great because they had some money and that helped. And then they got very enthused about it. So that has made the funders and everyone really keen on community hubs. I did a webinar with the person who is the full-time officer in Lincoln. What's the name? Do you know?
What the
Yeah,
locomotion? It's
the lady.
It's Charlotte.
Charlotte, yeah. She. I mean, she seemed very good. But I'm surprised that they haven't taken it further because, you know, I think people are getting quite on board with the idea of these sort of deliberative democracy.
So if I talk, because we meet up fairly often. If I mention your name, she'll know who I'm talking about, will she?
Yes, she will.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm certainly. We'll share this the webinar when we get the recording with other people in our CEC, and yeah, we'll see if we can reach out and say, look, we want to do something along the lines of what you're doing down in Enfield. You know, how can we get on board? Because obviously you're making roads into it. Then that's what we want to do in Lincoln. So yeah, that's great stuff.
Is that Aurora the hand up next? Sorry, I'm in between screens. Aurora, most welcome.
Yes, thank you. So just to add to what Francis was saying, I think for me, the most important thing at the moment in terms of these community hubs is to create, I don't know, links, contacts, friendships, so like ongoing atmosphere of trust, because I don't know how it is in other parts of the country, but in Enfield, my sense is that there is a lot of there are community organizations, but there's nothing to unite them. They all operate in a little corner, and they don't really come together about issues like the issues that we raised. So that's one of the great advantages that you know, we listen to what people are concerned about, and then we we bring them together to discuss things. But I don't want to you know, to make, well, I still think that we are at the beginning of the road, because it's turning things into action. It's about getting people involved into action. And I think that there are very few, still I can see there are very few people who are able or prepared or have the confidence to do that. So that's the next stage of our work, is to really get more people involved in these actions, actually. So how to translate. And I will give the example of air pollution, because there is so much confusion and so much lack of information, and so many even conspiracy theories with regard to air pollution, because of all the things that are happening in London in terms of ultra low emission zones and low low traffic neighborhoods, and in other various forms. And these are very, very upsetting issues for people. And but how to approach this is a big challenge. Yeah, it's a very big challenge. And this is a very, very important issue, because it's not just, it's about transport, it's about how people travel, what the effects of this travel is on CO2 and etc. So, you know, I really would like to see more what we would call people's assemblies, and which would express what people feel and believe and what needs to be done, but not to expect, you know, that people will agree with you, because, you know, if it's real democracy, then we should expect that people might make mistakes. The decisions that people take democratically in a real democracy might be mistaken. So it's a lot of hard work in the future.
Thank you, Aurora. Wise words. I've got my hand up. I'll hop over to Mia. Go for it.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah. Well, following on from what Aurora was saying, I've always felt with I'm all for more public transport, but it's like I always think that I don't agree with sort of the penalization of, like, I think there's a lot of focus on changing people's behavior as opposed to making public transport the easiest more easily accessible. And I'm particularly interested in sort of making it more accessible for disabled people, because a lot of disabled people don't do struggle with public transport, I think, because of the way that it's set up. And I'm actually autistic and I struggle with public transport, and I tend to just drive. But I would use public transport more if I felt it was better sort of if it was sort of used if it was more autism friendly, in that well, with me, I'm an abuse victim and I began to feel less and less safe being since the war on terror, quote unquote. And I think sort of my experience is like I feel more safe in a car. And I think if something was done to address that, then I would definitely use public transport more. I mean, I emailed, well, I spoke to Inclusion London and I didn't get a very sympathetic response back. But I think, as I say, I think if more was done systemically, I think more people would use public transport, myself included. So, yeah.
I think what you said is really interesting, because sometimes authorities don't listen to that sort of view, and community hubs can do that. But local authorities, some local authorities, and the adult social care part of Enfield is trying to do that, because they're trying to set up a way in which they can encourage what they call, and is often called now, it's the in-word co-design and co-production. So that if they're designing a service like public transport, they want to get people together to talk about how that can be improved for people, like people who are disabled, for example. Sometimes their co-design, though, is top down and not bottom up, and because we involve them in our collaborative network with others, we've put them in touch with a person who really designs bottom-up co-design work, so that they can try and improve that. Now, I think that's an outcome of the sort of community hubs, where we've managed to put a local authority doing something into touch with someone else who can help improve it, so that it's no longer top-down, but they're beginning to look at how they can have bottom-up consultation to tackle the issues that you just said, Mia.
Yeah.
Really important work there. You know, so just to bung a few bits in those, you know, our group's been trying to get empty buildings off council since the 1992 Rio Earth Summit. Islington Council that said they were going to give a building for free, and then rode back, so they wanted £1 million for it, but that was back in the early 90s. You know, it's really, really important that we have community space. You know, as we all know, I'm a big fan of physical spaces where people can meet, because you know, I can see, you know, we've seen the massive amount of change that happens when you've got a physical space, and it does take time, it does take energy, it does take money, although we've been good at running them with very little money over the years. But the change that happens when a community can see a vacant space in the high street or wherever it is, that many groups can cooperate on. And I think there was a comment there by Aurora about groups being all across the borough. And I think one of the analogies we use is like mycelium. Underneath, in every single, you know, mycelium, like mushrooms, is 3 miles underneath is the mushroom, and then you just see the little mushrooms popping above ground. In every borough, in every community, in every city, there is, you know, 50 groups, 100 groups, hundreds of different community groups, social groups, environmental groups. And sometimes, you know, 30% of them all know each other and they go to similar meetings, but when you've got a physical space that they can meet and they can connect, and one of the parts of that, you know, I call these buildings motherships for many other projects, and they do seem to have been quite good at creating community alliances. Like, I think actually, Mia, I think you're saying from Durham, one of the things on the YouTube channel, I'll pop it in here, that's the first meeting we had in Durham, there was 35 people on the Zoom, including the Green leader of the council and people from all sorts, from community groups, social groups, business groups, to, you know, solar panel groups, wildlife groups, elders groups, faith groups, people of different cultures. And it brought together an alliance of groups. And we really need these physical spaces. And I suppose the other one, just to, you know, our system of parliamentary democracy does not really, you know, it's a corporate lobbyist system. Those with the most money are getting the most laws pushed through, is what we were told when we occupied Parliament Square many years ago against the illegal wars and things. We really need to design a new system. And I like this idea that, you know, the community hubs and things, what we've dreamed of is that each of these, you know, 27, 30 odd climate emergency centres, more opening up, if they could all be doing people's assemblies regularly every couple of months, if they could be doing, you know, community assemblies, and that is all recorded, you know, on video, minutes taken, and that's then put onto something that we can all see what they're talking about in Durham or Derby or, you know, Plymouth or Norfolk or Carmarthen, around the country, so that we can actually see the similar things and things we want to change. We need to get that into the system, really. And you know, I suppose one of my questions back to Francis there was, how do you, there's lots of good ideas generated for these things and recommendations, so you record that, and then how does that get put through to the council, and how much does the council actually say we're going to act on this? Just one last couple of things. I talked to Jamie Kelsey-Fry, who was doing the People's Assemblies, and he said in Bristol, the council said to him, you're knocking on an open door with these People's Assemblies things. We want you, the people of Bristol, to do a community assembly, and we will listen and we will take on board for some policy things. Whether that actually happens or not, I've had a lot of talk from all sorts of politicians at all levels. But how do you get the stuff from the community hub and then try to get the council to act on it? Would be the next stage. Over.
I mean, that's the most difficult problem, because I mean, you know, any local authority would say, I want to listen to the community. They'd be mad if they didn't say that. They wouldn't get elected. Doesn't mean they'd do it. And very often local authorities, when they want to engage the community, want to do it on their own terms. They don't like independent, you know, action by communities setting up themselves and doing things and involving the council as equal partners. The council wants to feel they're in control. Of course, local authorities got a lot of power, but they're not in control. They don't have as much power as we think they have. The health authorities have power as well. The probation service, other bodies have power, and it's getting those groups together and working with them. So, you know, if we find it difficult working with the council, we'd try and work with the health authority that we have good relationships with. So we work with other statutory authorities. The council is not the only show in town, but we do try and work with councillors that are sympathetic with us, and we do work with officers. On our collaborative network, we have quite a few officers attend. They're doing something in Enfield now at last on flood alleviation, and they invited me into a Zoom meeting or Teams meeting, because organisations always use Teams, into a Teams meeting where I was the only person from the voluntary sector there. They were all officers. So we talk to officers a lot, and we talk to the community, the climate change officer, about things like heat excess and so on, and she will probably come to that. She's on a collaborative network, and I think it's working with officers that's more important. Working with councillors, sometimes they want to turn it into a political point rather than deal with the topic. You know, they want to show that they're doing it. They want recognition. and we really want to work with people who want to get things done. And if there are councillors that will do that, that's fine. Officers tend to, though there are officers as well who won't, you know, they're in for, you know, glory. But if you can work with the right sort of people, you can get influence. Councillors are really difficult. Again, it's that because that party political system, they're used to adversarial ways of working, which is not what assemblies and deliberative democracy is all about.
It's an ongoing mission, just a bit there, and then maybe Mary Ellen or others who haven't spoken will chip anything in. But, you know, it's an ongoing mission really to get cooperation between, you know, citizens and the public and councils and government and business and all levels cooperating together. It absolutely is a really critical, you know, climate emergency moment, all the tipping points being met. Do you want to give you a couple of examples here from around the network, which always helps? Worthing, I spoke to the other week, they're looking for a new building in June, but they've been there doing great stuff for the last year or so. And apparently got some money from the fire ambulance service under the kind of civil contingencies kind of planning. They're saying that, you know, here's a bit of money to the local climate emergency centre when things start going, you know, intense with the climate change and the other situations. Here's a bit of money. We want to work with climate emergency centres, which is interesting. And we need a lot more of that kind of, you know, working together. The other one was Kingston. I spoke to them today and a little chat, and I was optimistic when I went to see them 6 months ago. They said, oh, we've had a meeting with the GLA and with local Kingston Council, and they're getting us on board to help with emergency planning and flood risk. And, you know, if anything happens, you know, disaster-wise in the future. And I was like, oh, that's great news. And I spoke to her today, and to Danielle was there, and she said, oh, I said, how did that go? That was good news. She went, no, there was a meeting with Bloomberg Associates and someone from the council, but it was the most, she said it wasn't the most exciting council one, and it hasn't really led to going much further. You know, we really need action from councils, from government, business, and we can't wait round. This is why we're doing citizens initiatives like, you know, climate emergency centres and ECAF. Keep networking, folks. Keep at it. Helen and then Aurora and anyone else who hasn't spoken.
I was just wondering, Francis, whether you work with local press at all, or whether your local press are actually owned by some big Tory group and it's not worth it.
We're lucky. We've got a community press called Enfield Dispatch, which, you know, which is really good. It's the best local paper that's been in our area since I've been around since, well, I won't say when, or else you know how old I am. But it's you know, a really good paper, and does report stories very well. But it's really under financial difficulties because it doesn't get you know, the big corporate bodies sponsoring it. And so it's been looking for sponsors who will put £500 in, and we have done that. And we've encouraged other people to do that. So we've got a real good community local press going. And it's worth doing it. So we get on with them very well. There's an Enfield Independent, but it's the news in it is very, you know, poor. But the Dispatch, the community one, is great.
Aurora?
Yes. So with regard to your question about the council and how you get the council to do things, the answer is by changing the balance of power. And I think that ECAF is a very good example because initially we were treated with, so like we were kind of dismissed and, you know, oh, you know, all these people. And gradually they had to start paying attention to what we were doing and we were saying. And that obliged them to engage. Initially, they didn't want to talk to us at all. But you know, gradually, as I said, they started to want to talk to us on certain subjects. So at the moment is occurring with the officers. But I think we have to persist on changing the balance of power, which is to gain more and more support within our communities. And that will gradually also will oblige council to pay more attention and to listen to what we are saying. Just as simple as that.
I think our breakthrough, Aurora, came 3 years ago when the Climate Coalition approached us and said we're having a green week will you put something on? And we foolishly said yes. And in 9 days, we put 100 different events on, and it was amazing. And so our profile shot up very, very fast. And, you know, we could not be dismissed by the council or anyone else. They realised that we were there, and we had the support of the people who put things on with us. And so now they do listen with us, but I don't think the leader's too happy with us working with. She's not so happy working with us, but I think there are a lot of people who want to, and underneath they do work under the radar.
Still, there's a lot of work to do.
There is a lot.
Just to say, and then round to others, anyone who hasn't spoken, anyone wants final few comments or feedback or whatever you want to share, guys. You know, I hold Enfield Climate Action Forum as you know, as a community action forum that, you know, they've got an alliance of 120 groups, and I'm sure it's taken quite a long time to build up to that. But you know, you're doing really, really important work, and you really are integrated quite solidly with the community of, you know, of Enfield. I used to live there a long time ago, kind of, you know, Edmonton way, and I think I think the council paid us many years ago to do a survey. We did something called Earth Ambulance, and we went to Edmonton, which is a place I used to live. It was quite a deprived area around, and I think one of the questions on the survey was, what do you think about cars in the borough? And I think one of the things that came back was, yeah, we could do with more car parking spaces or something. And we were, you know, I mean, there is so much more we need to be doing and outreaching and that can be done. But you guys have got a really amazing model there, and we can all learn from each other and learn from you. And big up respect for all the hard work you're doing. Anyone else who wants to share? Mary Ellen, I don't know if you got any pearls of wisdom, or Helen, or anyone else that's spoken. Catherine, over.
Hi, Phoenix.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody else. Sorry, I've not contributed much and that I arrived so late, but yeah, I don't know if you've seen Neil Goodwin, who has raised the issue of how disabled people can't run from a climate crisis, can't run from floods, can't run from fires, can't fight for food when it's being handed out, like in Palestine, when everyone's fighting for those little bits of food that they can get. People with disabilities, with disabled children, with disabled adults, they're the ones that get hit first and hardest. The first children who starve to death were disabled children, and yeah, disability is with every crisis, with every emergency, disabled people or people with disabled children or adults get hit first and hardest, and we really need to look at how do we get them included and in decision making and provision, and sounding the alarm when alarms need to be sounded. Yeah, it's sorry, my brain's not functioning very well at moments, but I really want to make a point that we need to, and this government's current attacks on the welfare system, on bringing in the assisted dying bill, they're trying to push that through to make that law. There are already hundreds of thousands of us are dying, and social justice and climate justice are one and the same. We can't have climate justice without dealing with the social justice issues.
Thank you so much, Mary Ellen. Always wisdom, and really tuning in with things. That makes me think back to something Francis said there, and it shows that, you know, we can have national, local, and citizen action all come together. In France, they had a massive heat waves. I think he was saying back 2003, and they came up with a strategy. He was saying during the presentation, and one of the things they came up with was that people could have, within 7 minutes, they could walk to a cooling station or a cooling place. And whereas before that strategy, the consultation that happened, the strategy got put in, and I think I found a web link and put it in. It was part of the C40 cities, which is 40 cities mayors said we're actually going to do something after the Paris Climate Summit because governments aren't moving fast enough. And actually having these places set up you know, so that people got to know each other in the interims. It wasn't just there for the emergency. And rather than 45 minutes walk to go to a cooling station, it was 7 minutes. And there were some other strategies there. I think one of the community hubs that Francis talked about, that one of the subjects is, you know, elderly people and how they're affected by heat. You've just been talking about disabled people and how they're affected by disasters, heat and other things. I know there's big heat waves in Thailand, in lots of places around the country. How around the world, how are we going to work together to cooperatively come up with solutions to this? And that Paris, France example is a good example. They had their community hubs, they had their consultations, and they came up with a proper strategy. And the last bit there really was what's it, warming and cooling hubs. So warming hubs, you know, we all know about the cost of living crisis. We've done webinars on that. You know, Mary Ellen and others around Occupy Times, you knew that was, you know, 10,000 people dying from fuel poverty, our pensioners, our people who fought through World War II, dying for lack of heating. Absolutely terrible, you know. So there was talk about warming hubs and warming grants being given, and some of the climate emergency centres operated as warming hubs. I think Debs in Preston might say that, you know, they got a bit of small grant to help with warming hubs. But there was another thing about cooling hubs, and I think the cathedrals and the churches that some of the groups in Falmouth and others talked about having churches are cool places, so a place where people could go and keep cool. These disasters and emergencies are coming. We can face them together. We can build resilient communities, but it takes that kind of action like they did in Paris to come up with these solutions through the community hubs and things like that. So brilliant work going on there, Francis, Aurora and everyone. Over to Debs. We'll probably be winding up soon, but brilliant discussion tonight. Thanks everyone for coming and sharing. Debs in sunny Preston.
Just thinking how bloody frustrating it is, because if a country the size of France can put in cooling stations and warming stations within 7 minutes of everybody, why can't we do it? It's like we can't. My job, my day job, is being a support worker for people with Down syndrome and people who are in wheelchairs. We can't even push them down the street without being a pothole. So how the hell can we sort out like cooling stations and warm stations for them? It's like, it's a joke, isn't it? Well, it's not a joke. It's like a sick joke. It's like really, really annoying.
It's ironic.
Yeah.
Was they say, and then Mary Ellen, always money for war, but not always for the things that really need the money. Mary Ellen.
Yeah, I'd be very interested to know those cooling places and things that have been arranged in France. How many of them are actually disabled accessible, and what disability provision? Because most this is something that the UN even has raised now, is that whatever is being put in place, it's without or with very little consideration, if any, for disabled people, for blind people, for people with deaf and hearing issues. And this is the issue, is that though we're being hit first and hardest, disabled people are being considered last.
I mean, I'll check on that actually, but when Paris, you know, developed cooling spots where people can go, they weren't always buildings. Very often they were sort of areas with a lot of shade and water. Trees, say, where the temperature goes down. If you have a lot of trees, it can reduce the temperature by up to 14 degrees sometimes, from areas where there are no trees at all. So they've strategically looked at how they can develop those cooling spots, and they're of different variety, different kinds. They're always in buildings.
Thank you.
Very good. We need to find out more. I think there's a thing there on the Paris thing we've just posted, but I think we run to nearly 7:30. Thank you very much, everyone. Unless anyone wants to jump in for final comments or put a couple of words in the chat. Anything you think about tonight, or as a nice one, I think trusted people do. 3 words if you want to put in the chat about what you thought about tonight. It will be out on the YouTube. Join the WhatsApp or the Telegram. WhatsApp seems more busy at the moment. Chat groups for the CECs.
Can you send me the chat, because you will have that recorded as well, Phoenix, in your Zoom thing, because there's a lot of useful things in there.
Yes, yeah, we saved that, and I think Helen's been helping us that we put it out on the chat. I've just put the WhatsApp, which is busy on the Telegram, but join those groups, and the video and the notes minus people's emails will be up there. Helen, if you can help us with that again, that'd be great. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming for another wonderful Wednesday webinar. I'll leave the last word to Francis and Aurora. Thank you so much for, as someone just put there in the chat, really inspiring. It's great work you're doing. Let's keep working, and hopefully many groups learn from ECAF. Last words to Francis and Aurora.
Well, I was going to say thank you for letting me come along, and it's been really an interesting discussion to hear what some of you are doing and the work that's happening, and that's very encouraging. So thank you. It's been a good session.
Aurora, do you want a word?
Just to say thank you, and thank you to Mary Ellen, such an important point. And yes, I'm going to think quite a lot about it in the next few days. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording there. Big up the ECAF team. Set up a community hub in your area and get it all recorded, and hold your council to take some action and get everyone cooperating. Thanks very much. I'll stop there.
Thanks.